Hello, this is Hector Combo, your friend, and I'm trying out a new platform, a new way of doing a podcast. I'm no longer interested in reveling in the spotlight of a persona. I'm looking beyond just individual personas. I'm looking at the crux of the conversation, and the Combo Show, while it's a working title, is going to be a combination of different angles, and we're looking to go beyond the narrow scope of ideology. And on today's very first episode, with this in mind, we're joined by Jim Limber Davis. And Jim runs Liberty Defined on Facebook. So, Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're coming from, and what is Liberty?
That's a lot of questions, a lot of information to put in there. Well, I started Liberty Defined a long time ago, back somewhere around 2012 or so, and got caught up in a lot of the Ron Paul revolution stuff, and then started running with a bunch of other crowds. And as time went on, I kind of noticed that a lot of people, they got stuck on a number of ideas. They just weren't moving past that very much, or at least not that I could see. And then I started encountering a bunch of people who, it seemed everything that they were saying, well, the words were different, the tones and the emotional state and passions that they had were the same as those very people they were criticizing. And now I've started looking at other things beyond just, hardcore logical perspectives, and now looking into everybody, they have value on them. They place value on themselves, and they want that recognized. And when people start recognizing the value they've placed on themselves, they start looking at other people have placed value on them, on themselves as well. And really from there, I just started going in a totally different direction. At the risk of causing some ire and getting other people to look in my direction in an unfriendly light, I'm not much of a fan per se, and I don't mean this in a negative way. I'm not the individual who really wants to follow somebody who portrays a combative tone with the messages that they're trying to convey. I know a lot of people do this. One of the first individuals that I noticed who was doing this a lot, and it was very, very obvious, was Chris Cantwell. He was very prominent with that. And then I started noticing it in others, and I just didn't understand what the whole reason was. And so I came across some other individuals. They thought they portray, or they said they were practicing nonviolent communication, but every other statement or every other breath seemed to be a judgment of some sort built on an assumption, and it just comes across as incredibly combative. And so I've gotten away from a lot of that, and I try to highlight my own mistakes and see if I'm making these mistakes, then what other mistakes can be made, and then just kind of applying it like that. It's not something that a lot of people have really taken or embraced, it seems. So, but it's probably a little more long-winded than you were asking for, I suppose.
No, it's definitely what I wanted to hear, because as the introduction of this new platform or new way of talking to people where we relate beyond the persona. See, I don't like to drop names a lot of the time because people get caught in the persona. And what I found very fascinating about your experience is that it also it overlaps with my personal experience where people, they get into these reality tunnels or these matrix of ideas, where they think what they see is right and just, and everyone outside of that is immoral or, committed to violence. And it's funny to see people who understand and use nonviolent communication, how they become biased and judgmental themselves. And I think, in some sense, and I may be incorrect, this is just an issue with ideology itself, where it attempts to triumph over all, meaning like over all ideas. It's supremacy over all ideas. The interesting part in your trajectory is that you did not stop at one particular idea or one persona. So following that, what is it? And I'm not preaching to the choir here. What is it about the social dynamics in different communities that, produce the politics of persona? Does that question make sense to you? Do you know where I'm coming from?
I think so. I think what you're getting at is people's state of comprehension. Where are they at in their journey to learning different and new ideas? I think that's going to be a big deal for understanding and being able to relate to a lot of other people, because for a long time I've been a teacher in some capacity. No matter where I've gone, I've always been, whether I worked in a restaurant, I became a trainer, or whether I worked for the airlines, I was inadvertently made a trainer. And then even with my current jobs, I'm constantly teaching new people, all sorts of things. Like for my current job, I'm teaching people how to use Excel, which is the funniest thing because I've always hated that program. But I think when we start to understand and when teaching other people and when learning about how other people are learning and what they understand, that there's more than one path to every piece of wisdom. And I think that in some communities, to kind of take a page out of 1984, a lot of people get stuck on if they need to get the answer of 25, the only way to get to the answer of 25 is saying 5 times 5. They don't understand that you can take 125 and divide that by 5 and get 25. They don't understand that you can take 25 individual singles and count those up and get 25. They only see what one possible way, and anybody who gets to the same answer they get ends up being somehow wrong or a problem, or at least they get along until they discover how the other individual sees how they got to the same conclusion as they did. And I don't know. I think that might have a lot to do with the ideologies of each group and how they end up interacting with each other.
Yeah, you're right about that, because I've noticed as well on my, end of the world over here, broadcasting from North Carolina, and just my experience where I pollinated throughout these different communities, and I noticed that essentially most of the conversation was government bad. And obviously, in a society, whatever given group where people ultimately agree that, the state is a violent force and it's antiquated, as an antiquated power vehicle that really is counterproductive. I mean, that's the knee-jerk conversation. It's the government bad. But I feel like it's a reductionist argument that a lot of people who come into these schools of thought, they want to clamp onto because they also want to be noticed. We go down here to the dynamics of social groups, where there's, in a sense, there's a hierarchy of individuals where, whoever is the most rambunctious or, has the most immediate solutions. And you mentioned Christopher Cantwell, and he became a pariah in the libertarian community in New Hampshire. People would talk about him in a very bad, way. And his current standing with the alternative right and, white nationalist separatists or whatever, makes me wonder. It makes me wonder where our definitions went wrong, where I feel like everyone got into the Ron Paul revolution, or I should say everyone in the sense that young adults who are barely getting into politics, and looked beyond the party politics, went into libertarianism, like first, like really strongly into it, but they got lost along the way in liberty. So on your end of the spectrum, Davis, how do you see liberty? How do you define liberty?
Well, that is a question that I get asked fairly often, and I think that I've had a lot of followers who have decided to abandon ship with the direction that I'm going in because they maybe either don't understand the foundation or they don't remember. And liberty is something that it's a complex concept made up of a lot of really simple ideas. Just real quick, liberty is, as far as I define it, is made up of 4 main concepts: wealth, freedom, peace, and morality. Those 4 concepts, the first three, wealth is any good service or idea that is capable of maintaining and or improving the quality of life. If it can satisfy the need for sustenance, shelter, security, or happiness, then it has value because of what it can do for the human condition. First and foremost, that is the beginning of everything for liberty, because the human condition is absolute rock bottom poverty and complete and total nescience. And the moment that we have somebody who cares for us when we're born, they instill in us certain ideas and knowledge and how to learn certain things about ourselves and others. And then as we grow older, we want more independence and more freedom. That independence and freedom then must be cultivated by taking the responsibility to refine our time, our intellect, and our labor, our 3 natural resources that we have an abundance of, in order to acquire that wealth, whether we create it or we exchange or make trades for it. And being able to continually do this and maintain those abilities, we need peace. So we need to be able to have that. And the questions here are going to be, what is wealth? What is freedom? And what is peace? Or why do we want wealth? What do we want freedom from? And what is the benefit of peace? And understanding all of these 3 concepts here and how to practically apply them is what morality ends up becoming. And so those 4 concepts there are what I break down in my first book, Liberty Defined, and then I go for again in Morality Defined. And I don't get paid for these. I don't believe in charging a price for this sort of stuff, so they're available for free. But that's where everything starts. And I think a lot of people, they get into this perspective where certain things can only be certain ways, and they don't take into consideration that how they learned these certain things or learned these certain perspectives need to be recognized. A good example of this would be capitalism, where capitalism is often, it seems like people either hate it or they absolutely love it. It doesn't seem like there's really an in-between when you try to discuss anything about it anywhere on the internet. And it all boils down to people taking a stance. Whatever it is that they dislike about it, they dislike those specific things, and therefore the whole thing, everything for capitalism is bad. Or they'll take a couple of things that they really like, and so all of capitalism is great. But instead, they need to be looking at, if they really want to understand the crux of where they disagree and why with other people, they need to be looking at what those individual things are that they like and dislike, and what external and internal forces are at work there. In the case of, say, fiat currency, with the Federal Reserve notes and British pounds and anything coming from a centralized bank, essentially, all of that taxation, that has unintended consequences on everything. All those unintended consequences basically boil down to just being a broken window fallacy in terms of money. And when they try to set a very specific amount of that money, it turns into a tragedy of the commons, and all the greed seems to stem from that, or at least it's amplified with that. And then building upon that, we start seeing okay, so it's not really that capitalism is necessarily bad. It's that it's these individual actions that are bad, and it's not that capitalism is necessarily good because it's these individual things that we are allowed to do that we associate with capitalism. When in reality, it's just individual things that are being acted upon, smaller concepts that are less complex. Being able to not just define ideas or terms, but to actually being able to define ideas. And I think that's where a lot of people, I think they struggle with that. It becomes a barrier, not a problem, because the sun deciding to go supernova is a problem. That's a problem where we can't fix that. But being able to communicate with other individuals, being able to break down ideas and construct barriers, starting with being able to trust other individuals by showing them, hey, look, I just want to understand. I don't want to berate you. I don't want to say you're wrong. I just want to understand why you see what you see. That builds trust, and then we can start actually having conversations like that more and more, and there's less combative tones in it. But getting back to the definitions of liberty there, those four main concepts right there, those are still pretty complex in their own right, but each of them have to be broken down like I did with wealth. And I think if we start doing that, that will help spread a better foundation for understanding what it is that people are after, especially when making connections with others.
That foundation that we spoke of, communication, conversation, and a good faith, an argument that is in good faith, where it's like we're not trying to just attack the other side and demonize them, as in, taxation and stuff, where I follow your page on Facebook, Liberty Defined, and you were talking about how sometimes, the slogans that we use can be counterproductive and could divide people and detach them. And I think one of the important part that we're really focusing on this conversation is the idea that people are unwilling to investigate things outside of their own particular interests. So when we talk about capitalism or Marxism or any type of ism, the devil is in the details. And a lot of people, like, their way of analyzing these things. And the reason I say a lot of people is because in my personal experience, I've seen individuals from a subset of groups or whatever that have the same bias or thought patterns that prevents them from seeing the bigger picture. They just get fixated on that their persona or their identity is attached to these ideas. Like, well, I'm a capitalist, therefore it's a given that I'm these market forces represent my ideology or whatever. And talking about a conversation, nowadays it's so difficult to have a conversation where you feel like you have to walk on eggshells and really get, you don't want to hurt other people's feelings, and you know how it is nowadays. It's like you're stopped right even before you make a good effort to actually understand the other side. What got you, like, what about your experience or your philosophical awakening? What made you change and said, hey, well, where could I be wrong? What made you reassess your belief system?
Well, I know before the show started, we were talking about not discussing certain personal aspects, but in this case here, it's important to do that because I think a lot of people, and I don't mean to generalize, so anybody listening to this who automatically points out a generalization, know that is not what I'm intending to do. I do think that a lot of people end up being put into groups where they either understand or they don't understand. And I'm not in any way saying that anybody's personal trauma is worse than anybody else's or is lesser than anybody else's, because we all are handling whatever it is that we're handling based on what we know how to do. And I think that being the firstborn to a German immigrant over here, I got the brunt of physical punishment as a kid. I have two siblings, neither of which understand what I went through as a kid with our father. They just don't get it. My youngest sibling is 8 years younger, and while there was a lot of yelling that was endured, that sibling did not take the physical blows that I took. They didn't understand the fear. They didn't understand the anger that was coming from our dad. They didn't get any of that. And that carried over until I was in my early and then late 20s. And then all the way into the early 30s. And being able to go think back and recognize a lot of the things that I didn't like and be able to say it wasn't the people that did it to me. It wasn't a specific group of people. It was an individual who did it. And why did they do that? Now, I don't talk to my parents because of a lot of things that have happened. But one of the things that would help anybody understand, and it's not fair that some people have to go through this, and it heightens their emotional intelligence, because a lot of people they have a trauma or a string of traumas, whether it be they were a POW for years and years, or they were a rape victim, or they were the victim of bullying for years and years, whatever it is, even if it was an abusive parent. They typically understand something that if they're able to convey it correctly with words to another human being, that they're able to start understanding and seeing something that they can explain. Those who can't or who don't figure that out end up getting left behind and and oftentimes, not always, but a lot of times it definitely encourages them turning into very combative, hostile, angry, almost seemingly aggressive for no reason type of personalities. And I think that is something that allows a lot of people, at least for me anyway, to start looking into other people's motives as, hey, why would they possibly be doing this? And when a lot of people lash out at certain things, I think that it's always for a reason. Now, I had somebody recently on my Liberty Defined page, they decided that they needed to make a statement. Okay, cool. So I followed it up with that statement, and they came off, and I told them exactly the same thing in the exact same language that they provided me, and then about 2 paragraphs in, I stopped myself, and I said, now this is what I'm actually saying, and I just wanted to provide an example of what it is. So the individual is basically talking about how it's that how they were very upset with his woman, as he put it. And he used a lot of combative language, which basically stated that he was kind of looking down on other people. He gets so tired of this people who, well, if they can't handle the truth, then they don't need to hear it. And how there is this it's not what you said, it's how you said it type of deal. And it just basically went downhill from there. So I went through and I explained to him, I said, this is important to understand how we come across as people. Perception is reality for a lot of people because they're still learning. And this is, even though that's not fair, that is part of the journey of learning and growing. But there's more than just intellectual intelligence. We have to work on our emotional intelligence as well, because human beings are not ever just one thing or the other. They're a combination of both. And how much time and energy we invest into ourselves and to others in order to balance that out will make all the difference in the world. And doing that for yourself is insanely difficult, because sometimes there's just not enough inside of us, our experiences, to be able to do that. So we have to start looking towards others to do that. And when a lot of other people are doing this They're being combative. They're being aggressive. They're calling everybody snowflakes. They are telling everybody that they need to man up. They need to just control their emotions. None of that stuff really helps. It just teaches people, well, don't act like that and you won't be ridiculed. You don't have to be the fastest runner, but you just have to be the one, not the slowest, who gets caught by the bear or the rampaging mob. And I don't think people realize those are the lessons that they are teaching others, with their unintended consequences of the choices that they make sometimes. But I think it was all of the trauma that I had to deal with that really started helping me understand where to go in a different direction. And then I think after I had a threat on my life, even though the individual who issued this threat, I don't think they probably didn't really mean it, but I took it seriously because I have been in situations before where my life has been threatened. I have stared down the barrel of a loaded gun, pointed at me with intent to pull the trigger. You do that once, and then you start to come to grips with the reality of that situation. Words have a lot of meaning that we don't assign to them, that other people's actions assign to them. And I think that recognizing little itty bitty bits of information like that and start building upon it, I think that is what probably put me on the path to understanding that I need to do something more than just point out all the negative things, destroy the things that I don't like in the world, that I need to understand them and let people deconstruct their own actions. Maybe sometimes with a little encouragement, but definitely not with force or aggression.
Well, please excuse me for asking such a direct question, but when I get confronted with with an individual that recognizes his own uniqueness and has an effective way of communicating their ideas, I can't help myself get to the real bottom or the heart of the discussion. And I truly enjoy what you relate to me, because I understand it like this. Some people call it an awakening or a process of different events in one's life that are interconnected and arrive us to a point where we realize that the error of our ways is in our own authoring of our actions, what we do, what we say. Mm-hmm. And I also found it in my personal experience where I grew up, in a broken home, Catholic, poor, in Mexico, and there was things that I had to do to survive, and I learned a lot of the bad qualities of really bad characters, and that was a survival skill set that I kept on throughout my life, and is becoming counterproductive. But one thing that really stuck out with me when you were talking about your personal experience is this ideological trap where and I of course, we're not trying to make. I know that you're very cautious with your words, and it just encourages me to be cautious as well, where I'm not trying to make a generalization. We're all unique individuals from different backgrounds, but I think that there is some measure where our experience relates, and it's not necessarily cut up by logic or words. What I'm trying to say is when authentic individuals realize that they're caught up in an ideological trap where they're just projecting their anxiety, their trauma onto abstract concepts like, oh, well, my life sucks, I feel sad and depressed and impotent. It must be this group of people who are keeping me from actualizing myself. But the way that I understand you're taking a stand against this onslaught of irrationality is by being a mirror of authenticity. My words, I don't know if you resonate with this, with what I'm saying, but essentially I enjoy talking to people at the same level that they're operating, because you're acting as a mirror to display their combative language, their negative attitude. Because, like I had previously stated, just yelling slogans like all cops are bastards, or taxation is theft, or all the slogans that a lot of the libertarians use, that is also visible in other communities where you have the Republican right wingers and they talk about, oh, that's a snowflake. But then you really look down to it, you analyze it, it's like they act like the people that they hate, both sides and all sides. How do you see that? Is that something you've experienced in your particular trajectory?
I think that's a pretty fair assessment. That a lot of people do act or inadvertently mirror the things that they don't like. I think a lot of people may also fall into the trap of they don't realize what it is that they're doing. So they've learned how to communicate the same way as the people who hold philosophies that they don't agree with. I've kind of looked into this just a little bit, and I've noticed that at least in the United States and in some European politics, there are people who, if they're upper class or what would be considered upper class, they communicate their likes and dislikes in the same way as the people who are also from the upper class but with a different political perspective or ideology do. Same for middle class and same for lower class, respectively. And I think that this is all about how we learn to communicate with each other, because it's kind of how can I put this to where it makes more sense? It's a common statement for a lot of people in the various online liberty communities, the generic liberty communities, to where they will say, well, if government didn't have a 12,000-hour indoctrination center or program, and I think that a lot of people, they learn that. And when we are around a lot of other people who act and communicate a certain way, we will pick up their behaviors and their actions and kind of mirror some of what they do, because it's a socially acceptable thing to do. So when we have the big names in the liberty communities and they're real combative, and this one here I know is going to get me flack. Again, I try not to point out names, but this is something that I don't hate the individual. I just don't agree with their communication style. So Stefan Molyneux is one of them. He's a remarkably intelligent individual, without a doubt. He just comes across as insanely combative. I say insanely because there are so many things that he talks about that, if taken a different way, if taken 2 minutes or 2 seconds to consider a rewording of something, it could actually invite a lot more people in to understanding certain things. And so this leads to a third way, I think, where people do what they do, because of it's all about, hey, I got that reaction. So we have our leaders in the liberty community who also encourage certain behaviors, and so the people who follow them start mirroring or mimicking those behaviors as well. So when somebody is really combative, then their followers end up doing the same thing because they think it's acceptable, since this guy's got a lot of followers, they do a lot of work, they do a lot of this, I'm going to try to mirror what they do. And a lot of times when they try to do that, they don't pay attention to why the individual is actually doing what they're doing. They only see a small fraction of it. And I know with somebody like Molyneux, they probably do what I do, where they probably write multiple drafts of whatever it is that they're about to record or produce. And so they don't see all the work that went into carefully choosing certain words, or carefully choosing certain statements, or whatever it is that they're working on. And they don't see all that extra work. All they see is the end result, and they may not even read or listen to the entire piece of work. And then they only take a little bit from it, and then they completely misinterpret it, and then it just creates even more toxicity. And then the last thing, I think, the fourth major thing here is a lot of these leaders, I think a lot of times they become beholden to those who are willing to financially contribute to their work. this one's going to hit hard in a lot of the liberty communities, especially the online ones, because I think that a lot of them have turned into the anarchist version of politicians, where, and I don't think they mean to. I really don't think they mean to, but they really don't want to go back to doing things the way they were before they got into this sort of a lifestyle. But they go through, and those who happen to provide the most financial benefit end up also being some of the most combative individuals. So they do have to cater to them in a sense. Just like a politician, say if we don't like something Warren Buffett does, or we don't like something that Donald Trump did, then when they were providing campaign donations, we have to if we want their money, we have to go with them, at least a little bit. And I think that's something else that also encourages this mirroring of behavior, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy in some parts, especially for the fourth point there.
You totally stole, as you were. You didn't steal this. I'm just being cheeky. But as you were talking, I was taking a lot of notes, and the self-fulfilling prophecy is literally what I wrote about a couple of seconds ago while you were talking about it, because it reminds me, this is not my term, but I've heard other people use it, and they call it a validation gang. Essentially, where they, these personas, you're right. It took me such a long time to come to terms when I met these people, like one-to-one, in the conferences, in the conventions, in the community meetups, where they're just people like you and me. I'm not trying to downplay their intellect or, their agency or their notoriety. I just am making a simple statement to make me understand that I can't project a hero worship or make them like my super ego. They're like my parental figure. As much as I like individuals who have so much to share, I feel like that self-fulfilling prophecy of the monetized content, where the most loud person peacocking on the hill, and I know this is just metaphor, and I do not have as much sway in any libertarian community. Really, I'm really outside of that. But as someone who's outside looking in, I start looking at people just getting infected with the same mannerisms and the same way of looking at life. And I feel like it has a negative effect on individuals because it limits their understanding of reality. And it doesn't help them to truly develop on their own. I think, being combative within context, it really definitely helps. But out of touch with like everyday reality, meaning you constantly have to digest and deconstruct and put out your personal opinion about every other thing that comes about. The truth about this particular movie, the truth about this or that. And it just spreads this, kind of phantom wave of mutually agreed concepts. And if you don't fit in, it's so weird. But these people, and I mean these people meaning like those who get in the cult personality, and they're everywhere. It doesn't even matter if it's Stefan Molyneux or whatever. It's just the way it is. And I feel like when there's a plethora of different conversations or recorded podcasts or creative personalities who are rushing into this discussion, it kind of broadens the horizon and makes people realize that, hey, maybe, I'm wrong in this and it's okay. And there's other people who can show me, in a real decent, authentic way, what's the step forward. So in your opinion, Davis, what is a step forward for you individually and with your current projects?
A step forward, huh? Let me, before I answer that and before I go with that, I want to go back to something that you just said. You said that you think, did I get this wrong? That you think being combative might be useful? Did I get that right? Depends on context. Okay, so that's something that I've struggled with, and I don't know that I would necessarily say combative, but I would say conflict can be necessary. Combative, I think, is more of at least the way I see it, is more of an adjective, a descriptor for an actual action, for an actual verb. So I think it would be there could be conflict is necessary. Having a difference of opinion is conflict, but it doesn't necessarily have to be combative. I see combatives more as destructive. Now, that's not what you're getting at. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a very definite, precise point you've made, because it's true. Combative can mean many things, and it's just describing things. But you're right about, there is a good there's a place for conflict, and what follows after that, conflict resolution. Now that's the important part, and I think that's where you're going. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I just want to make the distinction because I think a lot of people they'll jump on that bandwagon, and like I just recently had an interview for a job where some of my feedback was I try to avoid being combative when engaging in conflict resolution, and the interviewers completely glossed over that point and said, well, you're afraid of conflict, so we don't think you're a good fit for this. And I promptly gave them, I gave them an email right back, and I said, hey, listen, based on the fact that you let me record this interview as well, I just wanted to point out that there was a miscommunication, or at least a misinterpretation on your part, where you said that I'm shying away from conflict, but that is not the case. It is the combative kind of conflict that I'm avoiding. Conflict is fine so long as it's something that's being engaged in order to understand how to problem solve and deep dive. But combative experience, no. Combative situations, those tend to be destructive, and destruction is not something that most of us, when we are truly looking to enlighten ourselves, engage in, unless it's the last act of self-defense. So, okay. So, and then the other question you said, now I think I had already forgotten.
That's okay. I think you've added more value to, what I was saying, because it's important to actualize, or at least contextualize. It's important. What's the context here? Do we mean to be combative in the sense that you blow up on people who are just halfway through a sentence and they're speaking about, their nuanced, unique experience in life? And they might say something like, well, I was watching the news and, there's all these, they might put in a buzzword like all this cultural Marxism or all this communism or this socialism. And they throw these really heavy philosophical words as if they know what they mean. And the counterparty, the person across the table, they might jump, and without even hearing the other side, they just get into it and become combative. And you see, the other thing too, I wanted to put this in, and I'm not going to derail too much, I swear, where you have these people who supposedly are effective communicators and talk about their ideas endlessly, but when you try to talk to them in a one-to-one, they're rarely good listeners. They kind of like just attack you. They're like, hold on, let me correct you. Like, it would be appreciated if people will listen to each other and at least have some tolerance or patience when, someone is speaking a point that they disagree with. I think I just wanted to add that to it, where it's like conflict resolution, effective communication, active listening, Socratic method, things that are really important in society that don't get the spotlight. The people who get the spotlight are people there who are for their own merit. And unfortunately, it's not the case for everybody, but it really saddens me that just the idea that I know that a persona could be in the public light and they could say everything that the crowd wants to listen and hear. But when it comes down to actually talking about the structures of power and how no matter how much self-improvement you do, we're still going to have a violent state. We're still going to have taxation. We're still going to have all these things. But I feel, and I think, and I'll pass it on to you, tell me what you think. I feel like all this self-help and, this feeling of detachment in general from like all people walks of life, it just makes us believe that we just, strap ourselves, and just improve and have a positive attitude, and somehow, the world that we want to see will manifest itself. Is that a convoluted statement, or does that pique any interesting thought process in you?
Self-help. That's an interesting concept. I think that a lot of it is really shallow. I actually have written about this a few times in the last year or so. the self-help thing, that if we just be positive and you kind of try to open up our spiritual side and all that business. I don't mean that to sound dismissive. I just have a hard time recognizing how we can just do these things. It's like it's almost as if somebody who's having an anxiety attack and is increasingly becoming frustrated and flustered, and somebody just comes up and just calm down, dude. Just calm down. That's not helpful. Just telling somebody just to be happy, I'd say it's toxic, but I'm not sure that's the right word. It's definitely nescient, because people don't know what they don't know when they say stuff like that. People are telling other people to do things that will help the people saying these things to feel more comfortable. And that's not helpful to the people who need the actual recognition and acknowledgement. So when we go through and we look at a lot of these self-help mantras, a lot of it, and this is where I'll disagree with a lot of people on. A lot of people will go in and I need to be spiritually enlightened or something, and we should try this psychedelic over here. And I think, that is not a good idea. If we want to understand why we're feeling what we're feeling, if we want to understand how to recognize what we don't know, using anything that alters our ability to understand who we are without any additional substances added to our already chemical mix, is not going to help us learn anymore. I think it's the equivalent of people doing I don't need to really understand how to perform mathematical equations. I have a calculator. So long as I have a general idea of what needs to be entered into the calculator first, then the calculator will do all the work for me. That's really selling oneself short. So when they make statements such as, "Oh, just be happy," and then the other individual just walks away, and it's like, well, how do you just be happy? How do you do that? People like to sling slogans like that all the time, but they have no follow-up. I think it's part of the same group that does the kill it with kindness, where they're constantly always happy. They're always showing some sort of state of joy or contentment, but they don't ever explore any of their other emotions. And it's almost as if they're cheating themselves out of something. For what reasons? I don't know, because everybody is different. But I find that when that happens, it ends up becoming more of a hindrance to self-growth than anything else. I think self-growth in particular, if we want to really make a positive impact on the world, would be beneficial by taking the time just to go ahead and get mad. Just go ahead and get angry and figure out, just stop. Once you're done and you've been able to figure out a way to calm down internally, or you have somebody who can help you, then start asking yourself questions. I mean, why was I just mad? Like, what was, and then eventually what happens, it almost always boils down to, like, this afternoon, I was in my car on my way home, and I had my car loaded up with some things I was transporting around. One of the things shifted. I was trying to merge onto a road, and I had a yield sign. A guy got over at the last second. The guy behind me started laying on the horn, and man, that just made me really angry. Not because the guy laid on his horn, but because I couldn't communicate to the guy that I didn't mean to make him slam his brakes on, so that he had to lay on the horn. Now, if he wasn't following me right up my bumper, he wouldn't have had to slam his brakes on. But that's neither here nor there. I was upset because I didn't know how to communicate to him that I didn't mean to have to stop there and inconvenience him. I had to stop because the other guy wouldn't let me over, so I had to stop and yield. And that right there, that's why I was upset. And people I don't think they look at their situations like that. So when they get upset, they get frustrated, they start calling other people other things. It's almost always a situation where there's something that they're not recognizing, and then the other smaller percentage, say like if it's 80 or 90%, the individual being frustrated because of something they can't control or make happen, the other 20 or 10% is things that other people are doing just because they can get away with it. But I don't think that's really that high. I think a lot of it has to do with just miscommunication, the inability to communicate. And then actually, if we get past, if we're able to work on this, that is what will actually lead to us having a better world. Although better is kind of a arbitrary word, though, I think.
Yeah, but in the context, and here we go, context. Yes. In the context that we're speaking, I think we can agree that effective communication, self-understanding, will lead to positive results. And it's important to mention this because we lack context. And I'm not talking about you and me. I'm just taking in the formal sense. We lack context. And I think that's the reason why I bring about the notion of self-help, because it lacks context, and throwing slogans that, positive thinking, or, the secret, if you just think a certain behavior or thought pattern, it will manifest into the material realm, or whatever mysticism that can be attached to it. I'm not really focused to it. I mean, underlying these blank slogans. And yeah, I think it's also like a very wicked, not in a positive sense, but I think in a negative sense, like it's a wicked thing to recommend blindly out of the spot psychedelics to anyone, because it goes again to context. Not everyone is prepared for that, for a magnification of their concepts, because nowadays, and I mean I'm not trying to like moralize this issue, but I feel like and it's not a feeling, it's an observation. The observation is people jump to prepackaged immediate solutions. Well, I don't have to reassess my philosophical biases or, my prejudice or anything. I could just go to the Amazon, and with some guy in some village with some funny potion, my problems will be solved. And some people do find solutions in that, but just recommending it as a blank slate for everyone to jump on the bandwagon, where, why would someone go out of their way to do that when I think personally that it's easier, quote unquote easier, relative, to reassess your beliefs and really look down upon yourself and contextualize the questions here that we really need to ask as individuals. It's like, who am I? Where am I coming? Where am I going? Where did I, all these existential questions that go down to the individual and not some collective abstraction. I think that's the beauty of this conversation, where, I invited you to the show without having, a concrete idea of your personality, of the way that you do things, but just having information that you shared on Facebook and just being intrigued by it, because your approach is not, hey, take this meme out and this is the slogan, everybody agrees with it, and that's just the way it is, and let's keep doing the same, the more of the same. And one of the last questions that I now remember that I wanted to ask you is, what is the next step for you? What are you doing as an authentic individual moving forward and spreading the message of liberty?
Oh, that's interesting you asked that, because I actually have three or four projects in the works. One is another book that I'm working on. It's called The Liberty Paradox. I was hoping to have that one done earlier last year, but things in life changed for me, so I had to put that on the back burner. But that is a book. It's going to be one of the few books that I actually, on Liberty, that I actually do put a price on. But that's because I want to invest the profits from that and turn them into hard copies and be able to give them away. The other projects I'm doing are actually, they are going to be Liberty Fundamentals. I've started recording a number of videos where I just break down the concepts of liberty, as I started at the beginning of this program with you, and it's just one step at a time. Where it's kind of like this, where you have, if anybody's ever tried to do anything with Excel before, Excel is seemingly overly complex, and that's because people don't understand that Excel is a tool. It's for manipulating data. That's the whole purpose of it, to organize and manipulate data, and a lot of people don't recognize that. It's the same thing with mathematics. What's the purpose of mathematics? Organizing quantities. That's all mathematics is about. So when people finally figure it out and they start recognizing that is the purpose of mathematics, and they start looking at mathematics as not just some arbitrary junk we had to learn in school, but it's actually it's an abstract tool for thinking that we can actually go through and apply this practically to everything that we do, then we start looking at it, well, what is adding and subtracting but faster counting? What is multiplying and dividing? Faster counting. What is anything with math but faster counting? It's always manipulating quantities or trying to find a quantity when you solve for x. That's it. And so that's what Liberty Fundamentals is going to be about. The other that I've already been somewhat working on is The Nescience of Fear, which is about emotional intelligence and how that can be practically applied in our life. And then the third is What is Thinking, where I've already started a number of scripts and recordings for that, where I go into breaking down how we actually interpret data, specifically the difference between tangible input and abstract input. My go-to for starters for a lot of the classes that I teach at my other jobs are, if I say think of a tree, most people will think of any sort of a tree. If I say think of an apple tree, most people will think of a tree with some sort of colored circles on it. Most of the time people think of red, being red apples are the most dominant out there in the markets, at least here in the States. And if I say red apple tree, then a lot of people end up going to that kindergarten drawing of an apple tree, which has got brown tree trunk and a green bush on top with little red circles to denote the apples on there. And I ask them, so why? Why do you think about that? Because everything that I just asked you to think about is rooted in some sort of tangible input. You can touch it, taste it, see it, smell it, and hear it. It's something to do with that. But when I ask a lot of people, I say, well, what does axiomatic mean? And a lot of people are like, they don't even know what that word is. Okay, so it's something along the lines of meaning self-evident. Well, what does self-evident means? It just means that you only need to look out into the universe and observe it, essentially. And that is the difference between tangible and abstract, where there is no tangible reference point. And understanding these here will allow us to actually better understand the ideas of liberty and emotions, especially with the fear that everybody has of other people because they don't understand. So those are the three big projects that I'm working on along with the book, the Liberty Paradox, and I hope to have a lot of these videos pushed out before the end of the summer. So.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you're a very busy guy, so we want to look into your work. So where's the best place to look at your videos, look at your content? Where can we follow you?
For starters, now I have shut down my website right now, but it's just jimlimberdavis.com. I post occasional updates on there to let people know what's going on, but there, or you can find me on Facebook, Liberty Defined, Liberty Fundamentals, The Nescience of Fear, and What is Thinking. Those are all pages that I will keep going, or keep maintaining. And then I will also be on YouTube under Jim Limber Davis.